All right, thank you, and sorry for this little adjustment I had to make. Thank you very much, Carlos. Thank you for this kind presentation. I'm here to talk about the relationship between DAO deficit and insomnia or sleep disorder. Insomnia being the most frequent sleep disorder. And if I may, I would like to introduce why we sleep, because this is going to set the context about how important it is to understand the consequences of sleep disorders and also to give the right importance to sleep, and if we can really correlate this sleep disorder and DAO deficit. Well, we all recognize that the human body is a masterpiece. It is a perfect biological machine and it functions at an optimal level. And nature provides all the resources for this to happen. So we can really consider that this biological machine, the human body, is actually more perfect than any machine that has been engineered by human beings, actually. However, as any other machine, if we want an optimal functioning for it throughout time, well, this machine has to be taken care of, which means that we have to incorporate certain habits so that we can perform as much as possible. I mean, everything that nature is providing us in terms of being rational animals, so that we can make the right decisions about our behavior, our mood, our happiness, and the degree of happiness that we can achieve. Nature is wise, and nature has its own way to manage how we entertain this machine. And one of these resources is sleep. Sleep is a physiological state that allows us to take care of this mission and the purpose of this perfect machine, which is a human being. We can differentiate that throughout life we go through two different stages. The stage of growth until the adult age, and from that point onwards, so from 20 to 25 years old, we start a stage of aging, progressive aging, until our last days. So, well, sleep has a fundamental role when it comes to the growth period. So this first period, and here sleep helps us build our body, the organs, to make them grow and develop these organs, also all the intellectual development, all these elements that will allow us to become persons that will take the most of their condition as persons, as human beings. I mean, a body that can respond to different challenges. And then once we reach this growth, the end of this growth period, and once we move into the aging period, well, then sleep will be there in order to process this in an optimal manner so that we can keep our health, so that we can keep vital as much as possible and as long as possible. So, well, sleep takes place, of course, in both stages, in the stage of growth and in the stage of aging. And the function of sleep has been very well studied, and the brain is the main organ that leads this process. However, even though today we know that we must preserve our sleep, because sleep is there to preserve our health, and it will allow us to maintain the machine on, well, we must recognize, however, that in recent times we are incorporating a series of habits that betray that sleep, that betray that space of time that we devote to sleep. So, in accordance with the Spanish Society of Sleep, we must recognize that 30% of the Spanish population suffer from sleep disorders. So, the rest that we get is not healthy. 45% of people sleep less than 7 hours. In the previous slide, we were saying that for a maintenance phase, the average hours of sleep is 7 to 8. So this would be the optimal number of hours devoted to resting. Again, I'm saying that if the role of sleep is to preserve health and to help the body have an optimal function, well then, of course, sleeping below that threshold means sacrificing time that is devoted to this optimal functioning. And we could even reach pathological situations. And this is what is happening nowadays. And it's quite alarming if we see the number of people who are sleeping actually not even 6 hours. Now, this situation could be high pathological risk situation. So this sleep deficit could lead to the development of certain diseases that I will now refer to. And in the case of the Spanish population, well, we are different. Even though we must recognize that life expectancy in Spain is quite high, we have to recognize, however, that we sleep less than other European citizens. So here I see not so much a problem, but rather an opportunity. Again, if we relate sleep to the stage where the brain helps maintain the human body, I would like to refer now to some examples that will have an effect on some key factors that preserve our health. For example, the relationship between sleep and the immune system. Today, we know and we have quite a lot of specific data about the mechanisms through which sleep and the immune system are related. I mean, there's this kind of crosstalk between the immune system and sleeping. So sleeping well will preserve the immune system in an optimal state. And also, some disruption coming from habits of these sleep would lead to the risk to a risk to the immune system, and also reversely. I mean, some disruption of the immune system could lead to the disruption of sleep, and this could even lead to diseases such as cancer. But also, as Dr. Peruccio was saying, we could relate this to fibromyalgia, for example. And as Dr. Blasco was saying before, we could also relate this to ADHD, especially in young people. If we talk about cardiovascular disorders and their relationship with sleep, I'm going to give you an example here that is going to feel quite familiar to the Spanish population, given the reference that Dr. Valentin Fuste, who's a very popular cardiologist, well, he used to claim that he could sleep very little hours, and actually he conducted a study with 5,000 individuals, and the study concluded that sleep is very much related to cardiovascular diseases. And and the lack of sleep could lead to some fatal prognosis situations such as sudden death or atrial fibrillation or some other kinds of arrhythmia that are quite prevalent. So today, this is all very well described. We could even say what the role of sleep is when it comes to producing hematopoietic cells, which can determine our capacity to preserve the hematological system and the cardiovascular system. I was mentioning the relationship between alterations of the immune system and cancer, and this has been very well described here at the University of Barcelona in Edivap's. We are trying to study whether, well, which comes first, if it's sleep deprivation that could lead to oncological processes, or if it's rather the opposite, if it's the development of cancer that can lead to high exposure to sleep disorders that will complicate the situation, the clinical situation. So we're really wondering what comes first, if it's sleep or if it's the disease or comorbidity that leads to a sleep disorder. Again, this is a case where there can be vicious circles. And now if we move to neurodegenerative diseases, Dr. Blasco, it was Dr. Blasco actually who pointed out the close relationship between, in this case he was mentioning neurotransmitters and the role of histamine related to cognitive capacity, retention capacity or memory, and so on and so forth. So dementia, for instance, and Alzheimer's disease, which are threatening pathologies for our current societies. Well, here again, sleep has a major role to play. Yesterday I was presenting at the Foundation Pascual Maragall at the forum the latest findings of our research with very large cohorts, and we're developing the relationship between risk factors that have been very well established today in an accurate manner and the risk of suffering from Alzheimer's disease. And sleep is one of the most important factors for dementia. And again, we know the relationship between the pandemic and mental disorders. And we know that, for example, after one night of sleep deprivation, well, we know about the mental consequences that this has and how irritable we may feel. I mean, we can be very nice people if we sleep well, but we can stop being nice people when this does not happen. But on top of this, again, this can lead to pathologies and important consequences for our well-being. So mental health is very much conditioned to the quality of our sleep. And there's also this thing which is so close to us. I was talking about the importance of sleeping well in order to have a good wakefulness state. And again, here some figures about the crash risk of sleep-deprived drivers. So again, this is all conditioned by the sleep. And science has shown today that sleep is a fundamental physiological state, not only for our health today, but rather for us and how we're able to maintain our health tomorrow in the future, and how it determines as well our aging. I mean, how we can interfere in a smart way so that we can optimize our aging and make it as healthy as possible so that we can have longer years ahead, but also years with better quality of life, since it seems that we're going to live longer than our predecessors. And the same goes for Lancet. I was talking about this article in Science, just a previous slide, but now I'm going to refer to the Lancet. And this was published on the 24th of September this year, Waking Up to the Importance of Sleep. This is about health professionals. You know, all health professionals, we take care about the health of other people, but we must incorporate sleep as a major element of our own health. And the importance of sleeping, this will be determined by our genotype of course, by who we are, but we must be aware as well that we're going to sleep better if we can better manage our daily habits. Since the very moment where we open our eyes to the moment where we close our eyes to fall asleep, well, we all go through a process which is organically programmed, and the brain is very sensitive to this. And this must allow us to have a perfect use of our resources, of our energy resources, our intellectual resources, so that we can take the most out of the day. If we know how to preserve good habits, we're going to sleep well at night. And when we start sleeping, we need to let our brain work. You know, for those who think that during sleep the brain rests, well, it's not exactly like this. The brain becomes responsible for taking very good care of the machine, for maintaining the machine. It's a glorious moment for the brain, for taking care of the body. And this starts when we close our eyes at night. So, during this process at night, the brain is going to take the challenge to take very good care of us. And the brain is very well organized. It is organized in a wise manner. And there are two fundamental phases. There's the REM phase. This is a moment at night where our eyes are going to move from side to side at a certain speed. And this REM moment means that the brain is going to take care of us becoming better people. I mean, having better capacity to memorize, to develop emotions, to develop our humor. So everything that is related to the functioning of the brain by itself and that makes us single individuals, it is during that REM phase where the brain is going to face the challenge. And then there is a non-REM phase where the eyes stop moving, and then the brain will enable our organs to work properly so that our organs can relate in a wise manner, so that our metabolism can respond. And again, here I'm going to refer to the immune system. During the REM phase, the brain works on our capacity, and during the non-REM phase, the brain will work on our capacity to do things. And all this happens in an organized manner. The REM and non-REM phase take place at different stages at night, and this would be the architecture of sleep. All those phases where the brain works to fulfill this challenge. Well, there are 5 cycles in that sleep architecture, and in each cycle there's the REM and the non-REM phase with also some sub-stages. And what's important here is that the brain can organize in order to achieve this process and do this every single night. But not only this, the brain will do this in an orderly manner. The first cycle is not the same as the 5th cycle. The 5th cycle will prepare our brain to become better people or to increase our skills, let's say. And the non-REM phase is related to certain phases in the body, and the non-REM will guarantee that our body will function in an optimal manner. And if the brain can achieve all of this, well, it will give us intelligence, capacity of concentration, the capacity to sleep. I mean, not only will our organs work, but also we will be the persons that are determined by our genotype, so the persons that we want to be and that we can be. So, well, in other words, in order to complete this explanation about the mechanism to sleep, I would like to say that each person should establish, depending on their sex and gender, how they face their challenges. Well, we must know our needs regarding sleep and how our brain enables us to respond to who we are as individuals. And so what I'm suggesting here is that each person has their own needs, and we must be intelligent to recognize how we sleep and how we can improve that so that we can help our brain to better manage the maintenance of the body so that we can have a better aging. So there's not one single formula to solve the sleep disorders that we may suffer from, even though the prevalence is something that we must raise awareness of, even though, well, we know that sleep disorders will alter this process and will threaten the health of people. Now, if the prevalence is so high, we can talk about a public health problem. Again, how do we relate DAO deficiency to sleep disorders? Well, it's true that insomnia is the most prevalent sleep disorder that we can describe. It is characterized by a difficulty to fall asleep or to keep asleep. And it's also related to people, for instance, who get up to wake up very early in the morning. And not only this, but all these people suffer from sleepiness, feeling asleep during the day. The prevalence of insomnia is very high. And, you know, Europe and North America are comparable, even though it's true that there are different ways to describe insomnia. There may be different types of insomnia, but again, 6% of the cases have been diagnosed medically, so they can be characterized in a clear way. But we know anyway that 33% of the population, in Spain it was 30% of the population, suffers at least occasionally of insomnia or symptoms of insomnia, and this is applicable to the United States and to developed countries. And the incidence is higher in women, and age is also a conditioning factor for the presence of symptoms of insomnia. And now the relationship with DAO. Well, histamine has been described already. Histamine is an agent that promotes wakefulness. Well, we know that there is some specific medication to deal with sleep disorders, and it's antihistamine. Antihistamine, well, they may lead to this adverse effect of provoking sleep, but it's actually very good products for people who suffer from insomnia. So the fact that histamine is related to migraine and to all these symptoms and to clinical situations that have been described, for instance, rhinorrhea, dyspnea, tachycardia, and so on, well, this is very much related to cases of insomnia. So this makes us think that, yes, we can establish and we will establish a correlation, a close correlation between symptoms of insomnia and high levels of histamine due to a DAO deficiency. So this is what we want. We want to prove this hypothesis. There is not too much literature on this, but we want to demonstrate, to show this close relationship. So that's why we have developed a clinical trial in two different phases. First of all, the prevalence. We're going to determine the prevalence of genetic DAO deficiency amongst patients with insomnia symptoms, and we want to determine to what extent, if it is so significant for other pathologies like fibromyalgia, for example. And the idea is that, well, once we have confirmed that there's this correlation in the prevalence, well, then we will try to evaluate if DAO supplementation may improve insomnia situations. And in order to do that, we're going to conduct a double-blind placebo trial in order to determine this correlation. I'm going to show you very quickly the preliminary results. And I'm talking about preliminary because we have right now 47 patients enrolled who have been observed, and they have, well, and DAO deficiency has been determined for these patients. And, well, this can be interesting for you all. So we have this N number of 47 with a mean age of 49 years old, minimum 20, maximum 74, and 65% of them show DAO deficiency. So these patients with insomnia symptoms show, well, 65% of them show DAO deficiency. 77% are women and 32% are men. And we can also determine that 65%, and here we have to be careful when it comes to determining how among the group we can show the correlation with the DAO symptoms. I mean, not only do we bear in mind the sex, because the percentages are very close to each other. I mean, 65 and 67 for male and female. And finally, regarding the symptoms, well, we want to know which are the dominant symptoms and which of those symptoms are medically determined, as insomnia symptoms, for instance, the conciliation and the maintenance of sleep, and how the symptoms are expressed for these individuals. 50% of them occur systematically, and for the 50% remaining, at least they happen 3 times, so 3 nights per week. And finally, comorbidities, the most frequent comorbidities for individuals showing insomnia symptoms related to DAO deficiency. Well, most frequent comorbidities are gastrointestinal symptoms, allergies, migraine, also fibromyalgia, to complete the presentation by Dr. Peruccio, for instance, and also ADHD that Dr. Blasco was telling us about. Now, if you have time, you can scan the QR code and you can rate your sleep. It will give you an idea of the quality of your sleep. And in the second QR code, I give you some information to better understand how and why we sleep and the importance for this in our health. So I really invite you to access the Sleep Foundation. This is an American foundation that is very competent when it comes to dissemination and when it comes to conveying the importance of sleep in our lives.